So there's no schedule here. We're just having a conversation. So anything you want to ask, ask. I'll do my best to give you an honest, transparent answer to whatever you ask. I don't know that I think this should be called a hot seat, but I didn't pick that out, let me tell you.
I'm just curious about the ILPs, right?
Sure.
So we have some CDC kids that I'm doing them for them too.
You know, you could, and it might be good to, because it's such a different process than the IEP. If it's a CDC kid that you're not benefiting from ESL, it may not be worth your time to do it. You may want to do.
The small children, they don't even hear their native language.
Yeah, so you may not. Well, are you sure they're EL then?
Well, we wanted to reclassify them, but we were told they were showing growth, and so we didn't get that done.
If they're showing growth, you're doing something right.
Well, we do it through the IEP, so.
Okay. Well,
somebody's doing something right.
Somebody's doing something right, yeah. But really, if you have severe cognitive disabilities, they're on an IEP, and you don't need an ILP, we're not going to deem you for that. If it's a child that has a learning disability and is really benefiting from ESL and growing at the same pace, I think it would be nice to have an ILP with the IEP, because the IEP is this big government document that's all this legalese in it. The ILP is a communicative document that you can really praise them on. So I think it's more for motivation. That's a good question. Anyone else have a question?
Are there resources to help our translators? I know that came up yesterday, guidance on how to train them, or PD that we can give, some just, I don't know, a framework or something.
There's nothing that we do with, there's nothing the state does with translators and paraprofessionals. That's really what you decide to do. But there are some school systems, I know when I was teaching in Metro Nashville, there was a package of materials and a training that all of their translators and interpreters that were working with IEPs had to go through to learn the language of the IEP.
Yeah.
They had to learn the language of disabilities so that they could actually have that conversation. And it was not a short training. It was several days over a period of time. I mean, it was like maybe you have a full day now and a month later you follow up with a full day, because that's a lot of information. Yeah. So I think there were also trainings, or maybe they were more impromptu and as needed, but for disciplinary things and for zero tolerance and for parent communication and how you could communicate that. But I do think it's a great idea to have your parapros trained, even in, I mean, occasionally, you know, you hear a translator say something and you think, well, I wouldn't have said that. Because culturally it may not be what we wanted to, you know, to communicate. So I used to have a deal with my translator or interpreter before we got in a situation and said, okay, I know that you may want to take my cultural edges off, you know, and I know I don't know your culture, but when I tell you I want you to say this exactly, I want you to say this exactly, and let them know it's from me. It's not from you. It's my words. So if they're going to be upset, they'll be upset with me. But there are certain things I need to communicate very clearly. You know, so I think some of those understandings need to be put in place, but there's nothing, no document, no package of materials, no. I think if you reached out to Molly Stovall, Molly would probably, if they still have that training, she would probably share that with you. Metro Nashville I have found to be very generous with the work that they do in sharing. So is Shelby County. Knox County is very generous. So if you know, the bigger districts have more work, more resources though. So sometimes, you know, if they've done something for the Korean speaking students and you have one in your district, you might get something from them to help you communicate with those parents. Because basically handbooks are about the same across the state. to take the front page off and put on a new logo, but it's better than having nothing. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Question. I would like to know why we don't treat ESL as more as a foreign language more so than a content. Because we get, I'm sure you know, we get some students that don't have any basis of English at all, and we're giving them these documents to read, these texts to read that are very lengthy and have very high vocabulary. For instance, like "gawk," and they don't know what "look" is. So that's just something that I've wondered why we don't do that.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. If you think about our foreign language programs in our high schools, and most of them are in our high schools, we would not expect to take 2 or 3 years of Spanish and be able to go to a Spanish school and take a test in physics.
Right.
And so foreign languages are often taught more as social language. And the way the Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights views ESL is that it is ELA for beginners and low intermediates. It is their ELA. Because they cannot access, a 7th grader who just came and has a 300-word vocabulary cannot access the literature that an American 7th grader is reading. So for them, it's a different approach. It's a little bit stronger. It's a little bit more based on academics than social language. And most of what we do until we get into the 3rd and 4th year of a foreign language is very social. So that's a good question. I'm not sure I gave you a good answer, but that's the best I got. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The accommodations on the ILPs. Let's say we choose read aloud for social studies for the class because the student is very strong in listening, weak in reading.
Yeah.
So if that teacher is giving that student the accommodation on the classroom assessments and things like that, if there's a big assessment at the end of the year, like, what is it? Yeah. The ILP should be evidence that they need that on that other assessment.
It
correct?
should be. It should be.
Okay.
But there's also a protocol through assessment. In fact, if you were here yesterday and saw Rachel Supay talk, Rachel just texted me because she's in a meeting and she's
had the same question.
She's talking about do English learners need the text to speech?
Right.
And I wrote her back and said yes, certain ones certainly do, and we don't want that accommodation to go away. Not all of them.
Right.
Because if they have good reading skills,
Then
they don't need it.
Right.
And it's like somebody reading to you. How many of you have been read to lately? It's irritating. I don't want to hear somebody else read sometimes. I want to read it myself and I can go at my own pace. So most of our kids that are intermediate are fine without that accommodation, but a lot of our beginners and low intermediates understand what they hear, but they're really not there with their reading skills.
Yeah.
And
even
so
some of our low readers who have
all we can deal with is the ESL end.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see how strong those accommodations were in the ILP. Because are they as strong as the ones that are in the IEP?
No, nothing is as strong in the ILP as it is in the
They
IEP.
trump the ILP.
The IEP, yeah. Well, the IEP is a federal document. The ILP is a state district document. So that pretty much gives you the weight there.
Okay.
Yeah. You can have to pay back federal funds if you don't meet what's required in the IEP. In the ILP, you might get a fine and get some sort of problem. But I mean, it's probably what we're going to do is say your ILPs aren't adequate, and we're going to work with you and let's make a plan.
Okay.
So it's a very different metric.
Okay.
Hope that helps. Yes.
So with the introduction of the ILPs now, I just wanted a little clarification on how thorough are they looking for them to be, because we're doing them every, 4.5 weeks now?
At a minute.
I at a minimum, with a caseload of 35 students, like how in our schedule do you think that we could do that, or is there anything coming down the pipe where they're gonna mandate some time for that, or? I don't know, what I'm asking, but you know what I mean?
That's
Yeah.
really a district decision, but let me tell you, 4.5 got in there because the lawyer said I had to put in something.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and you were already doing 4.5 on RTI, and I'm picking a number out of thin air. And so I said, that'll work. But it doesn't have to be the same. I would not have it the same. If I were still in the classroom, and I used ILPs when I was in a classroom. If I had a beginner, he's my beginner. He's not very motivated, he's pretty depressed. He's unhappy he left his dog and his uncle and his grandma, and he doesn't speak much of the language, and Americans smell funny and eat weird things. And, you know, he's not happy. So, he needs to be encouraged. He's a beginner. So I'm going to put a goal on there that he can reach in 3 to 5 days. And in 3 to 5 days, I'm going to say, you have done great. Look, here's what we wrote, and you have done it. Here's a gold star, or here's, you know, whatever you got, or I'm going to put an exclamation point or something on there. You have done so well. Now let's do another goal. Because the two things that we're looking for out of ILPs are collaboration and motivation. I just gave you motivation. I hope. Once you get, look at that smile. All right. That encourages a beginner. Now, if you have an advanced kid that's a 12th grader that's already grown up completely, you know how high school kids are. They think they're grown up the minute they walk in as a freshman. They may not need something every week, but they might. You know, so I would tie it more to the ability level to motivate the student than to something. All I did to update his ILP was put a gold star on it. Now I've got 4.5 weeks before I'm required to do anything. That's it. I didn't call parents. I didn't have a meeting. I didn't have to write all day long. It's very simplistic things. And to me, that's better than making it some document that lives as a document for monitoring. We have enough of those, don't we? This is for the kid. This is totally for the kid and to help you have some proof that you're doing the right things and that you know where this child's going. You know, and sometimes, every once in a while, you have a child in your class at a caseload of 175 that I can type. Most all of them. And, you know, occasionally there would be a kid sitting there and I think, you know, I really don't know where their goals are. So that would precipitate a discussion to try to get that conversation going. What do you think you need? It looks to me like from your scores, you're having trouble with this, is that true? And gives them some input to you. And think about how valuable that is to know that they see a weakness and they want to work on it. You've just motivated them. Because if you give them something that you think and they don't agree, they're not motivated. I'm not motivated when somebody tells me to do something I don't want to do. Are you? No, none of us are. So, I mean, it's really for motivation. It's not a gotcha. And if you're being how many of you are being monitored this year? Few of you. If you're being monitored, what we want to see is that you have one for every English learner that's appropriate to have one for, and that you're trying. We're not putting huge parameters around it. And we've had a lot of discussions at the state about this because, you know, that was one of the first things that came. We need to set up this huge thing for monitoring. And it's like, look, they're just starting this. This is a process that's iterative. I mean, you're going to change what you do over time as you do it. You're going to find things that fit your teaching style, fit your personality, fit the way you interact with children, and you're going to put those in your process. I don't think we can legislate, write, stamp board policy and say, this is the way you have to do it. Because I don't know your children. You know your kids. And so that's where this is coming from. It's really supposed to be student-centered.
I don't want to betray my district, but just because
I understand you're from Arkansas. Yeah, okay.
So I've heard so much about the IOP, apparently I missed something. And so I didn't realize that they had to be updated every 4 board have weeks?
It's in state board policy.
Okay,
And I would
like,
suggest,
I'm sorry.
yeah, I would suggest everybody go out there and read the state board policy that came out on July 27th. It's the latest,
Okay.
it's the greatest. And I'm saying that because we're going to take things like exit criteria out of the manual. We're gonna put it on state board policy with a sentence in the manual that says check current state board policy. Because those are changing too quickly. And we can't take that manual down and revise it to the extent that communication wants and get it back up. So I've had districts confused. 4.5 is in state board policy. That's a minimum.
So, okay. So if I have I teach elementary, so let's say if I have 4 second graders, and, 3 of them are kind of at the same level, one maybe a little bit more advanced. So can I say, select recount, by, I'm just trying to remember, but, can I select the same goal? I mean, obviously, that it would be appropriate, but is it okay if I have the same goal or 2 goals for them and for my lesson planning and, rather than having 4 or 5 different goals that would I be penalized because it would look like I was trying to do it?
You wouldn't be
Too easy or
penalized, you
something?
might get some guidance.
Okay.
Because I find out of 4 kids, seldom or all 4 of them have the greatest need that's the same.
Okay.
So I would encourage you, rather than thinking about big, grandiose goals, to think about very short-term goals.
Okay.
Because second graders are little. I mean, you tell them 4.5 weeks, that's an eternity.
Right.
I mean, these are the kids that count their birthdays in quarters of a year.
Right.
So I mean, I would just put small goals in there. If this one is got really bad handwriting and you can't read half of what he writes, but this one over here writes really well but never uses punctuation. All you gotta do is say, puts periods on all sentences this week. Writes legibly all week long. It doesn't have to be some huge goal. It's just little pieces that are gonna motivate that child.
Okay.
And so if 2 of them happen to have the same need, absolutely do that. But if they don't worry about it being standards based. Okay, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about some of the programs, IEPs are very standards based. What standards are you going to teach? How are you going to get there? What accommodations? We're looking at those things, but we're not looking. We are trusting you that you're going to teach ESL standards or ELD standards and academic standards together. That's what we've told you to do, and we believe you're doing it. So we don't need to see all that proof of standards. We don't need all that language in there about which standards you're teaching and what you're doing. We just need to know, what is it today you're doing with this kid? What is it this week or this month that you're focusing on?
And perhaps we could use the WIDA can-do descriptors
Absolutely.
to inform those goals that we set.
We can-do descriptors are excellent for that, because that's the direction we want to go. Somebody over here. Yes.
So if you're saying that we have little goals like that they meet within a week or 2, on high school level, so I'm kind of thinking a little bit different than what
Yes.
you're talking about.
You have a heavier caseload in some ways, yeah.
So, I have to have some sort of documentation that shows that they've met that goal, correct?
No. We're trusting you. You graded their papers. I don't want to come in and have to check a stack of ILPs that are this fat each. If you tell me that they have mastered the present tense verb this week, good enough. Now you probably keep a portfolio or keep some of their work, and you could show that if push came to shove. But no, we're not looking for you to have stacks of documentation like the IEP does. Yeah, that's too much work. And the whole goal of this, and I know it's been misunderstood, and some of it's, is our fault, because, even people at the state were looking at big things. We're looking at motivation and coordination, collaboration. That's it.
Are we going to get any resources as for instance, with the TNTESOL, kids have map testing, they have all these different testing things that they do to be able to judge where the kids are and have some kind of prediction of how they will score on the TNTESOL and what you can help them improve in. However, when it comes to the WIDA, the only times the kids really see the WIDA is before they get ready to take the test. It gives like a sample and kind of gives them a video, but they're not really getting any experience using it or practicing with it. Are we going to get any of these resources to be able to help them?
There are some resources out there. There are some books out there that do that your district can purchase. Anybody know the names of them? Finish line. Okay, anything else? I think there's another one.
They have it everything. They have it everything high school, and then it has all the domains, and then they just have to practice over and over and over. And you could use that.
It
You
could
have
use
to
the
be
second grade.
Second grade.
1 week you could do it, and
You cover it.
As far as if you're getting anything from assessment that helps you coordinate that,
I'm sorry,
if you're looking for anything from assessment that coordinates that, the person you need to go to is a young lady named Megan Sellers. Laurie Nixon was our person before, and Laurie finished her doctorate and is now a professor at Austin Peay. And so she left the state to move on, and Megan Sellers is our new, and it's Sellers, no A-N-S, 2 E's.
and so like contact her.
Contact her at tn.gov, and she can answer some of those questions for you. You know, there are so many assessments out there. I'm not even sure I know all of the assessments kids take. Between the benchmarks and the summative and the formative, it's very complicated. And I live in the world of ESL. Okay, so for me, there's the WAPT for kindergartners, and we'll talk about that in a minute if you want to. There's the WIDA screener 1 through 12, pretty straightforward. That's where we get our diagnostic data to place kids, and we know it's not the best data because screeners are not the best test. And then there's the WIDA Access. We did develop for the ILP trainings. How many of you got to come to an ILP training this summer? Okay, if you were there, we did have a couple of matrices. One was from accountability that showed that 1-year growth, and you could figure the 2-year growth based off that if you wanted, or you could use their whole matrix. And then there was one that Adam did, if you heard Adam yesterday, that actually showed where we are. And when we were having the discussions about should we use this one, I said, if somebody handed me this today and I were teaching high school, I would go turn in a resignation letter. Because it showed where we are, and those kids were moving 1/10 of a point across the state. If I could only move a child from level 1 to level 2 in 10 years, I'm not a decent high school teacher. I mean, truly. So that matrix you can use, but use it with a grain of salt. Look at it as this is where the state is, not where you are. Your district may be, hopefully, I wish I could say they all were, but they're not, or we wouldn't have that average. But we should be outperforming that. You know, I never accepted less than a half year's growth for my kids. And the minute I saw one that wasn't growing, my thought to myself was, there's something I missed and didn't do for this child. Because I'm a good teacher, and I'm sure all of you are, and if you're a good teacher and you're doing what needs to be done, they should be growing. And if they're not, we need to look at why they're not. And are we missing a link, or is there a special need there that we've not uncovered? And sometimes that means, you know, get your battle axes ready for the school psychologist, because they think they have to be proficient before they can be tested. You're not going to get proficient if you have special needs.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen. And so we run some of that interference at the state for you if you get in a kerfuffle with someone, to use Judge Judy's language. Let us know, and we'll try to help you out there. Did that answer your question? You have a follow-up?
Yes, it did. And can you repeat, how did you spell Megan Sellers?
MEGAN dot Sellers, SELLERS @tn.gov. And if you forget it, email me. I'll send it out. And I'm here next week. I'm in the office next week. It's exciting. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm gonna preface by saying I'm not leading this question to answer on one. But I just noticed in a lot of districts and a lot of situations I hear about in the topics that there isn't a lot of
we're in a political game sometimes, yeah. And that's a great question. You know, there are some standards that we go by. We wrote them up at one point, and we're ready to publish them. And they basically bounced back to us and said, that's really a district decision. You really don't need to be guiding districts on how to run their own programs. And I understand that. So it's a fine line, because if that's fine, we won't guide you, but if we don't guide you, then are you making the right decisions? Push in looks very different from school to school and from district to district. There are some push-in programs that are very good and are very strong and are following academic standards. There are others where I walk into school and the push-in program is the kids in the back of the room on a computer with Rosetta Stone. That's not pushing in. That's babysitting. And let me tell you, Adam and I have looked at some of the information. There is a connection, and Katie and I have looked at it too. The districts that spend the most money on software and the least money on other things see the least growth. We haven't gotten it proven. It's not statistically accepted yet. But kids are not going to learn from a box. I mean, you do not wake up in the morning, grab your cup of coffee, and go sit down in front of a plastic box and have a conversation with it. If you're lucky enough to have someone else in the house with you, you want to, share that cup of coffee and have a conversation with a real person. It's not intuitive. I mean, maybe for some of the newer generation it is, but I walk in my house, I'm not going to pick up my phone and text my husband. I'm going to have a conversation. And our kids need authentic language. What comes out of a computer is not authentic language. And I irritated somebody, but I'll still say it. I didn't allow my kids or encourage my kids to use dictionaries, because most English learners do not know how to use a bilingual dictionary. Now, if they're Asian and they've been educated, I guarantee they can use a bilingual dictionary. But most of us don't. And if somebody handed me an Arabic dictionary right now and said, look it up, I wouldn't know how to use it. I wouldn't know what I was sitting on one end or the other. There's no way I could find it. I told my kids I owned a dictionary. And every time they needed to know something, I was also their grammar guide. They could come up and have an authentic conversation with me. Not only was I teaching them, hopefully, a word, but I was teaching them the skills they needed to circumnavigate, because Kim Foltz said this morning, we say, tell me that again, I can't understand you, say it again, say it again. That's not what we need. They said it, we didn't understand. So what we should be saying is, find another way to ask me that. Find another way to make that request. And so when you look a child in the eye and you say, I don't understand you, let's find another way for you to ask that question, they understand, one, it's a problem. I'm not being understood. And they understand somebody's going to help me. To me, that's a lot. I worked with a peer who, I don't think she ever told a child a word in their life. She had a row of dictionaries that were as big as a library. And the poor little things would go over there and dig through it all day and never learn a thing. And it just irritated me, because that's not authentic language. If a child doesn't understand which preposition to use, you can ask them, talk to a friend, and if they can get it that way, that's great. If they can't, then you got them and a friend that you can come up and have a conversation with and show them that beside is different than on. It's pretty easy. Take a pencil and demonstrate it. And they understand. So I believe in authentic language. And I think we owe the kids, and if you disagree, it's okay, but I believe we owe the kids showing them what their grade level peers do. So if everything we do is dumbing down the text, not showing them the text that their peers are working from, they don't really know that they have the weaknesses that they know. If we help them and scaffold for a reading assignment in social studies or history, but they get to see what the other kids are reading, then they understand, wow, I can't do this yet. And it sometimes encourages an inquisitiveness to see how what you've scaffolded matches what the other kids are doing. And I had a teacher say that's unfair because if I give that information to ESL kids, if I give the scaffolded notes to an ESL child, there are 20 other kids in my room that can't read. Well, give it to them too. You know, I mean, it's not something that should be a secret. We should be helping all kids. And I was, you know, I used to occasionally have other kids come into my room because I didn't like ISS, so I take them into my room. And if they were interested in what we were doing, I didn't care to give them an ESL lesson. Maybe they needed it. So, other questions? Yes.
Okay, so yesterday, the young lady was talking about the information that needs to be sent home to the parents about their eligibility for EL services, right? What are the requirements? Is it just the eligibility form to let the parents know that okay, your student's screened and that they're receiving services, and the exit to monitoring? Are they the only ones each year, or should we also give a continuation of services each year?
You do not have to give a continuation.
Okay,
Some
so just the
districts do.
eligibility and the
And,
exit.
yeah, and it is an extra protection. So if you have families that you're a little bit leery of, that have been a little bit push off, you know, it's a protection to your district to do
Okay.
that. So if you want to do it, it's okay. What you need to do with everything you do in your district, you need a written procedure. And you need to train everybody in your school that touches the situations. So if we're reclassifying a child in high school, very often that data goes through a guidance counselor and not the ESL teacher. Depends on where you are. But if it goes to a guidance counselor and they don't know that there's a procedure, then they're going to just go in and change it. And then your district could change a transition student into an English learner. And if the English learner complains, how do you prove that was done equitably? You need a procedure for just about everything. They don't have to be long. They don't have to be tedious. They can be bullet points or numbered, but you need to do the same thing every time with every child.
And a waiver form, should we give a new one of those out each year?
No,
So if they sign it that 1 year, then it's there until
it's
they
there
say.
until they need a change.
Okay.
Unless your district decides differently.
Okay,
It is definitely local control.
okay.
Yes.
You said you were gonna talk about the WAPT screener.
Yeah.
How do you feel about, children who pass the kindergarten screener and then first grade, second grade, they're having enormous struggles that as an experienced ESL teacher, it is quacking like an ESL
Okay,
situation.
I'm gonna tell you how I feel. I feel like the gen ed teachers that had that child for 2 years didn't know how to deal with them. And that's one reason we've put, they have to be trained on the ESL standards and they have to have training if they're touching an English learner. You don't become fluent by accident. I mean, it's work, even for a kindergartner. It takes some work to be fluent. And if they are at where they need to be, if they're right where they need to be, and they get good instruction and good support from their gen ed teachers, they're going to continue to thrive. And the minute there's an issue, if they reach out to you and they say, Jason, I'm having trouble with this kindergartner. I think she's got some gaps in her knowledge. As an ESL teacher, Jason's going to go in and say, okay, let's figure out where the gaps are and let's fix them. And you do an intervention and you fix your problems and then you move forward. But that's a hard thing for kids to be jerked in and out of ESL. And I watched it at a middle school and high school level. Sometimes the parents blame those children for failure. You were okay and you haven't done what you need to do, so I'm going to whip you or spank you or beat you or take away your dessert or something because you haven't done what you're supposed to do. That's not fair to that child because it's not the child who hasn't done it, it's we that haven't done it as a school system. Yes?
As an ESL teacher, kindergarten, first to second grade, when they're developing basic foundation skills, should I focus my teaching on foundation skills or language development skills?
Foundational English language development skill.
I know.
How's that for fun? foundational skills that the other children in the class have, that the English learner doesn't have, then you need to fill in those gaps and try to move them forward. If they come to you in kindergarten or first grade, probably they're only going to be in ESL 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years at the most, because they're going to catch up, and they're going to want to be with their peers, and we want them with their peers. But really focusing on what they need individually through that ILP or through your process is going to help you know exactly where to go next and help you keep that organized and give you a tool to communicate with teachers. Because, you know, it's one thing if you go into Miss Smith's class and you say, you know, Maria has these issues and this is what I think. But it's another thing when you have this big old fat document you can take in there and show.
I have a couple second graders that can't read at all, period. So, I was told,
Are they new to ESL in second grade, or did they start in kindergarten?
I just started with them. I'm
You just started, so you don't know.
started with them. So, I think they've been in the school since kindergarten.
If they've been in the school since kindergarten and they were on level when they started kindergarten, they should be reading in second grade. You can't change that at this point. So what you need to do is probably give them some very targeted help to try to get that reading where it needs to be with their peers.
So the foundation skills needs to be, the focus should be foundation skills.
Yeah.
Not the expeditionary learning.
No.
Okay.
And look at which teachers have them. You know, and if you have the report, and if you don't, try to build it so that you eventually will have to say to that teacher, we're having some issues because these kids are coming in fluent, and somehow we're missing, and I always use we, you know, because even though I might not have anything to do with it, we miss a piece to help them read. And so I'm working on a project now with the state about phonics, teaching phonics. And they've talked about it should be for K through 3 only. And I said, look, I taught in high school. When they come in as a refugee and they have never read and they don't know phonics, you might as well pull out that kindergarten information and probably not use the same examples and pictures. But it's the same skills.
Yeah.
And all kids don't learn to read the same way. So you have to kind of know how to do that. If you're an ESL teacher and you're not a good reading teacher, or you feel inadequate in reading, please reach out to the core offices and see what helps out there for you. I went back and took some reading classes because my assumption was if you're in high school, you read. Not true. It's not true. And it's one thing to be, they're not illiterate, but they're functionally illiterate. They certainly could not survive in a corporate world or in a business world where they were dependent on writing reports when they can't even read, what's written on the McDonald's charts. We need to and that's our only opportunity to get those kids any post-secondary opportunities that we learned about yesterday. Yes.
I was piggybacking off of the young lady that here's a question. What would be your suggestion if you have advised your principals that, that you've advised your principals that all the teachers need to be trained on WIDA, can do so through the standards. However, at this point in the school year, it still hasn't been done. And you gave them the options of I can teach them, they can go to a class, or they can do a webinar, but it hasn't been done. What would you suggest?
It's a tricky situation, but I would go back from this meeting because you're here in a meeting today, and it doesn't look like you're just coming out of left field. And say, Chandler here said, print off the board policy, and I would highlight got a second. I was at a meeting this week and something came up I think you might want to see, and I made a copy for you and I highlighted the relevant parts. And, Ms. Linear was talking about how, there were some things that were required this year that I'm not sure we fully implemented, and I just wanted you to have a chance to look at it. I wouldn't go much beyond that, I just kind of leave it at that. If that doesn't work, you might mention it to your Title III director if you have a good relationship. They'll do their best for you. Most 99.9% of the time, they're right there with you. They want what's best for the kids. So, but it's a tricky situation, and you can escalate. I'll be very transparent. You can escalate to me if you need to, but if you call me, if Alice calls me and says, "Jan, I've got a problem," not that we've ever done this, but Jan, I've got a problem, and I don't know where to take it. And she tells me the situation, I will be honest with her and say, "Alice, either you can do this, you can drop it, or you can let me proceed. But if I proceed, I'm going to take it to the OCR attorney." But I'm not going to just say, "Alice called me and I'm going to take this to the OCR attorney," because I don't want to get her fired. I don't want to get her in trouble with her job. I'm just trying to give her support. So I will be honest with you. If it's a serious violation, of course, we all have to report. But generally, it's a situation where the communication is not broken down. And if we can fix the communication, I think we can fix the issue.
It helps to tell them it's new, because I've had some issues too, and it's helped the communication go, "Gosh, this is brand new." So that makes it, that puts a little sugar on it.
Yeah, it does. And that's what
Bring it back to our principals,
I do that at the State Department. They send me to a national meeting, and I gather up what I need to support what I think we need to do, and I bring it back and say, "I want to share this with you." It's better than walking in and saying, "This is what we need to do."
Actually, I've got an issue from yesterday, and that's how I'm gonna treat it. I'm gonna go around and say, "Oh my gosh, I heard this yesterday."
And I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I know it's a problem, but that's how I'm gonna approach it.
Just want to make sure we're in compliance.
And generally, principals will be happy with that, because they don't want to get found out of compliance. Principals pretty much walk the line with their head across the chopping block all the time. There's a lot of change in principals.
It has helped too that ELL performance is now part of accountability.
It is.
That just naturally helped us.
It does. But work with the people that you work with and try to collaborate more. Anyone else? Anything else?
How are the cut scores on the kindergarten WAPT? How are those determined?
For the screener or for the?
Yes, for the screener.
They were determined by a study of all 31 states when we joined where they cut. And I interviewed most of the states. And Georgia, for example, had 30. You didn't score 30, you went into ESL. And they said that was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that. Because we've got kids stuck in ESL that shouldn't be there. So we talked to other states and they said, "Well, we did 25 and 25 wasn't well." So it was really an interview process. And we came to what we believe is good. We also took some information at the end of the first year to see if people were okay with that. And we changed our exit scores again. But, again, we'll take your information. If you're having a lot of issues, please share that with us, because honestly, Katie and I are not in your positions. And it's been 12 years since I've been in a classroom. So I don't know what you know, and I don't know how it's working in the classroom until you tell me, and I will listen.
So is the service level though, an hour or nothing? That's.
No, there are some criteria in the board policy. If it's below a certain level first semester, or if it's below a certain level, if you tested them on the second semester test, and you
Like
get
the
a
entering ones, and they were 26 or whatever. It's like either they don't qualify or they get out. There's no.
well, kindergartners are tricky. I'm gonna tell you, kindergartners are tricky because the like goldfish sometimes. So, I mean, what we have to do is we have to take it with a grain of salt. And a lot of those kids that test in, and we want to catch them all. We want to catch all of them. And I would rather err in making them an English learner and them not need it than taking that service away and finding out later they didn't need it. But if you get a kid, and this happens every year, I should already have emails coming in, and I probably do in that 240 stack that I have to do. But you will get ESL kindergartners that when you start working with them and they get beyond that being terrified of the teacher and they've made a few friends, that you find out they don't need anything except glue to keep them in their seat. And so what you need to do is change their schedule. And if you want protection from me, you send me some data and say, we tested Jose and this is how he scored. However, we've done this benchmark testing and we're finding this, his teacher says this. Send me some data and I will send you back a nice little email saying, please try him 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, and see if that's adequate. Or try him as a push-in his kindergarten classroom and check on him twice a week and see. Because we don't want kids held in ESL, but a test is a test. I mean, you know, you sit by the right person, your score may go up. You sit by the wrong person, your score may go down. You have a headache and you may not do well. Sun's in your eyes, you may not do well. So, I mean, it's not, it didn't come out of some holy document. It's just a testimony.
And sometimes it's better to wait, after, to get 30 days, right? Because they to wait to get them
30 days to have them in class.
Right. So, you go to the teacher and talk to them first, or they even open up or anything. So, okay, let me meet this child, I might come back next week or something. And that really helps to lower their affective culture too.
And if you have a child that you suspect might have a learning disability that hasn't been identified, and you're not sure, and every year we get kids that we find out should have said English, but didn't. They, for some reason, their parents do something else. You can wait and serve those kids in ESL and trauma. They can take, if the parent agrees, they can go into ESL on a trial basis and see if they like it, and then you have some proof. You've worked with them. You know what an English learner looks like. You know what they don't look like. And so you can look at their skills and go, okay, this child, I understand that her parents may speak Spanish, but she is speaking English really well. And I think she would be better with grade level peers.
Right.
And I am a firm believer you are the experts. And so we have to trust what you tell us. Yes. Anybody will say it'll be 2 hours.
So how do you classify them in the meantime?
You have to have them classified in 30 days. Now, it is a special education student and you're waiting. OCR says you're not classifying them for 30 days, but you're doing a better classification with them, and you're not denying them any service. And the problem with waiting until testing them for 60 days is that they're being denied service. So if it's a special education situation, give them the service, you're not denying them the service, and then test them a little further out.
Maybe just note that in their file.
Yeah.
And put in this, and you have the evidence.
But see, we don't really.
But it depends on the whole language survey. Now, if the whole language survey says
Right.
Spanish, then you're going to have a little bit harder time. If it says English, you can't test them no matter what.
Right, but it does have a different language.
Yeah, you can negotiate a little bit, but don't negotiate with every kid. Just the ones that you suspect. Most of your, 99% of your kids you can test in that 30-day window of placement. It's the ones that you really have a doubt about. And you know what I'm talking about, because you get in the assessment room with them, or you get ready to assess them, and they just seem a little flat. And you're thinking they're either not connecting with me, or there's a problem here. And if you can go back and try it the next day, talk to them 2 or 3 days, develop a little rapport, maybe even play some games with them. Say, I'm going to read you some sentences and you tell me what I said. And see if they've got any retention. Because you and I both know a child that can't retain language may have some special needs.
Yeah.
And then you know better the direction to go. There's nothing that says you have to, sometimes your district schedules say this. But there's nothing in state policy or federal law that says you have to test them all the first week.
Right.
It says you need to test them as soon as possible and get them services no longer than 30 calendar days. And the 14-day thing went away. So you got 30 days.
And that's from enrollment.
That's from enrollment. Unless they, enrollment or the beginning of school.
Okay.
So if, they may have enrolled in June or in May if they're a pre-K kid, but you can wait until that first couple weeks of school to screen them on. Yes?
We had a student, who just came a few weeks ago from Guatemala, 13 years old, and she speaks like a Mayan dialect. And so far they haven't gotten her to do anything, like no work, no communication, nothing. So what about screening her? Could we wait?
I would immediately get a counselor involved, because a lot of those kids have been through some atrocities that are unbelievable. Getting from there to here, I'd get a counselor involved, and I'd try to get somebody who speaks Spanish, if there's somebody in the community, and have her checked out, because you don't want to add more stress to somebody that might be in a suicidal point or stress to them. See what you find out. If you've got a Mayan speaker or parent that you could trust and get permission from the family to use, or if you've got a translator who's a Mayan speaker, I would get some books, some pictures, and I would talk about them with her and see if she can repeat. Try to develop some rapport. Because that tells you a lot. I mean, we don't have a pre-screening instrument. We're trying to develop one with WIDA for special education. Won't be this year, probably. If WIDA buys it, it won't be next year. But if WIDA doesn't, we'll move it forward with it next year, because I already have Metro National volunteer. So we're trying to get something, where you can kind of see do they know anything. And even if you show them shapes and they say it in their language, they've got something there that they're working on.
Her dad speaks Spanish also.
Does he speak Mayan?
Yes.
Well, then maybe he's the one. Ask him to come in and work with her for 15 or 20 minutes and show her shapes and colors.
She's had very limited schooling.
Yeah, that's not unusual. Yeah, when you're living in poverty, schooling is not high priority. Somebody over here, a question?
We've met with our GED teachers and shown, the access scores, gone through everything. And my GED teachers, some of them, especially the higher grades, are asking, can we have feedback from this WIDA access test on what was not mastered? And we don't get anything back.
Well, you get the student reports back, so you can share the student reports. But we don't get item analysis.
Right.
We do not get item analysis. So basically, it's all about the language and vocabulary of those disciplines. English language arts, social situations, English language arts, math, science, and social studies. So that's about all we have to tell them. There is not an ESL test outside of Lost Links, which is not a summative assessment. It's a test that's kind of like the old Stella and the Helga. It's never updated, so Lost Links gives you some of that item analysis. If you have the model kits in your district, they do not align to the new access as well as they should. And WIDA has come up with an online model version that aligns better. But the problem is you can't give it by domain. Or you can, but you have to pay for the whole thing. So you're paying per kid. It's $16 or $18 per kid, whether you give reading or whether you give science or whether you give social studies. And if we're doing it 3 times a year, you have to pay 3 times a year. So to me, it's not a very user-friendly platform, because that's awfully expensive, and we have a lot of expense with assessment anyway. So the model, if you have an old paper thing, you might get some feedback from that. Some of the formative tests do item analysis, and if you believe that child is accessing that test, I would look at that. I would look at the can-do descriptors, because they're pretty on target. They're pretty much on target.
That's what, that's what we're printing off for everybody.
Yeah.
My other thing is like, especially for high school, the low score that on my high school kids was speaking.
It's on everybody. Almost everybody has it.
So, is there anything where you can give us to say why that child, I mean, you're in that room, I'm not looking at this, what they were told as the prompt, but in my brain I'm thinking,
Now, the switch was before they revised the test and before they set new standards on the test for cut scores, for the bookmarking. 50% of all English learners that took WIDA Access, the first version, got a 6 on speaking. Because speaking was social language and social language only. And so as we're moving into a new era of assessments, they beefed that up. So now speaking is a lot about academic language. It has a lot more academic vocabulary and a lot more questions in it that have to do with things that they would not know if they didn't know the discipline. They brought together about $1.5 million worth of teachers. They spent a ton of money. And they did the benchmarking process. Now, several of us, including me, have complained on your behalf. I think they brought some of the wrong people to the table. For example, and I love Boy Nixon, but she never taught ESL a day in her life. They chose to put her at the table for Tennessee rather than me. I was in a classroom. I knew what kids do and what they don't do. Lori called me though, to her advantage, she called me and she said, this is not working. This is not working because teachers are being encouraged to be tough because we didn't want all those kids scoring 6s. Well, the teachers that they had, and a lot of them were not as experienced, I believe, as they should have been, set those scores so high that it really put the cut lower than it is now. And so we threw a fit with statisticians and said, you gotta help us. You gotta help us a little bit. And so they came up with the best they could. They equated it as best they could. We asked, can you redo it? But there's no money to redo it because it would take several $1 million and they're a nonprofit. And if they were to redo that, the only way they could do it was to add it into our costs as states. And so we don't want that test to go up. It's high enough now, so.
I saw where next year they're going for this effectiveness over correctness. I saw that on your WIDA stuff, How we were told they're rolling out all new software.
Well, and some of that is.
So I'm wondering, are they gonna change their speaking?
We're gonna change, some of the rubrics are gonna be a little different. Because if the rubric is too tight, if the person scoring it or the machine scoring it, which is the case now, most of the time it's machine, and we've only given them 3 options, but that child can adapt language and come up with a 4th or 5th option that's a good answer, then it's not a content test, it's a language test.
So a machine scoring?
A machine is scoring a good part of this. Yeah, it is for all of our tests now. Everything is just about as machine scoring. And there are cases, where the machine spits out something and there are tests to make sure that it's being checked by live readers. And there are live readers on
It's outside your comfort zone.
yeah, you're right. Well, and I never used an answer key. I don't think they should be illegal. I don't think any teacher should ever have an answer key in their hands. If you don't know your content, don't teach it. And if you know your content, you don't need an answer key. And the kids would come up with answers that were so good, but they didn't fit the answer key. And to have a teacher mark them wrong, or for a child to bring a multiple choice question to me and say, I didn't know whether to pick B or C because when I read it, this one is really, my interpretation is this, and on C it's this, and they're awfully close together. How would I distinguish? To me, that child is pretty fluent. I'm not going to count that question wrong because they've to navigate and communicate. And so that's what I would like to see more of in the way of scoring, is that we're giving them credit for language use more than for the writing. And thinking in English and producing it back. Oh, Joseph's coming here. Time is up. Yeah, my time is up. I don't want to keep you guys.
This room's been very long all day, and we have some.
I have passed out.
No, I don't want to interrupt.
Is there anything else up here on the to say? If you wanting to get ready for that wonderful reception?
All right.
Sure, you're welcome.
Hey, if you're going over to the Columbia State Community College, we'd be glad to have you there. It's not very far from here, but people have been asking how to get there. You'll see on your, if you map it, it's GPS. Liberty Pike is where it's on. When you look at Liberty Pike, there'll be a big classroom building. But when you enter the campus, there's an administration building. That's actually where we are. It's not a very big campus at all. There's like 3 buildings that face each other. It's pretty easy. So you'll see the administration building.